Quando você ouve um podcast, está procurando entretenimento ou conhecimento, certo? E se você procura por desempenho e qualidade para o seu veículo, qual a sua escolha? Os amortecedores Motorcraft têm tecnologia Ford e oferecem uma condução suave para uma viagem tranquila e segura. Escolha a confiabilidade dos amortecedores Motorcraft, válidos para a linha K, Fiesta, EcoSport e muito mais. Quando terminar seu podcast, é só acessar a loja da Ford no Mercado Livre e experimentar a diferença.
Are you enjoying the Single Tracks podcast? Well, we could use your support. The small but dedicated Single Tracks team works hard to share the mountain bike information that inspires epic adventures. Through this podcast, our worldwide database of trail maps and photos, and daily news and reviews on the website. So, consider becoming a monthly, annual, or lifetime pro supporter and enjoy ad-free browsing on the website, free Single Tracks stickers in the mail, and discounts on merch for as little as $3 per month. Go to singletracks.com/support to sign up and to find out other ways you can help support our mission. That's singletracks.com/support. Thank you and happy trails. Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Jon Cariveau. Jon is the head of marketing for Moots, the Steamboat Springs, Colorado-based bike brand known for hand-building premium titanium bikes. Jon is a passionate rider and racer and has been with the brand for 24 years, starting in the shop when Moots had less than half a dozen employees. Thanks for joining us, Jon.
Yeah, Jeff, pleasure to be here. Always nice to chat with folks, for sure.
Yeah. Well, how did you end up living in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and working for Moots? Seems like neither of those really is going to happen by accident. You probably had to work at that.
Yeah, definitely a twist of life events, I guess. Back in those days, I had finished up college and was destined to work in the golf course industry, of all things. I have a horticulture degree from Oklahoma State University, and I moved here after working my college years in a bike shop to kind of fuel my passion and pay the bills here and there. And I had a very good friend move to Steamboat initially as a mechanic, and I was kind of at a crossroads of my life, and he said, you ought to come up here and check it out. And so I drove my 1985 Toyota Land Cruiser and my yellow lab dog, and anything that I owned at the time, I drove to Steamboat and showed up at his door. And he looked at me and he said, well, I didn't know you were going to move here. I thought you were just visiting.
Yeah. What time of year was this? Was this winter or summer? Because I feel like for me, summer would suck me in. But then if I went in winter, I'd be like, okay, it's all right. But
yeah. It was early summer, June, and I did drive over Rabbit Ears Pass that year. And the valley and the mountains had record snowfall, and there were still 12-foot snowbanks on Rabbit Ears Pass.
Whoa.
And that was definitely the start of, they call it the Steamboat Curse, where, just like you said, the summers suck you in, mm-hmm. and then you endure the winter if you're not a big wintertime sports fan or activities fan. And so that's it. I came into town. I went to work for a golf course in the area and spent a summer doing that, and then kind of quickly changed course and found my way back to bicycles. I was a trained bike mechanic through Barnett Bicycle Institute in Colorado Springs. And my instructor there was none other than Calvin Jones, who runs Park Tool Development these days. And that really got me into the super technical side of the bike world, for sure.
Yeah, cool. So over the years, Moots has come out with a number of mountain bike innovations, starting in 1987 with the YBB Softail suspension design. You were there from very early stages. Maybe you were there when it first came out. Tell us how that design sort of came about.
Yeah, I mean, after working for the bike shop called Sore Saddle Cyclery, which was the home base of Moots cycles at the time. The frames were literally being made in the back of the bike shop. And that was about 1994. And soon after that, I did go to work for Moots after, getting to know Kent Erickson, the founder. And then, they were widely known for the YBB. And at that time, it had made the change to titanium. But kind of that first bike in '87, it was made out of steel. That was our material of choice for the first 10 years of Moots' existence. And that was the material of the times, right? Titanium was kind of this wonder material that nobody had a grasp on in a big way. And when Kent built that first YBB in '87, it was built out of prestige steel tubing. And the kind of the spark that really got that going was this ancient bike Kent had come across in a photo album and then in person. It was literally from the early 1900s. It was somewhat of a pivoted design, but a similar format. There was a pivot around the bottom bracket shell, and then this little tiny, shock behind the seat tube. And that was kind of Kent's, that was his inspiration. And building it out of prestige tubing was a great first step. And then as time went on, the fatigue resistance of steel showed its face, basically, and eventually those bikes would crack. If you've ever sat and flexed kind of a paper clip back and forth a number of times, it will eventually fail. And similar to a chainstay on a bike, especially when made out of steel. So that was a great start to the YBB. And right at 1991, the access to titanium, literature on titanium, the properties of it started to become a little more accessible. And one of the welders at Moots at the time, I believe there was one welder, and he said, we should really look at this material. The fatigue resistance and the properties of this material really could be the saving grace of this design. And that was it. In 1991, the first titanium YBB was made, and almost overnight, the steel tubing that Moots had in stock at the time was sold, and from that point forward, it was titanium.
Interesting. And I guess, so titanium, it's not going to fatigue the same way that the steel will. That's something unique to titanium where it won't break, or will it just take longer to sort of snap if you bend it back and forth?
It depends on how much you're flexing it. It will eventually reach a point of fatigue and fail, but that fatigue life is longer than almost any material that's out there. Since then, have developed the YBB in a couple of different platforms over the years, and we've had our bikes sent off for testing. And I recall once early 2000, it was kind of time to send off another frame because we did that periodically and still do, and we had it fatigue tested, and the outfit that was testing it, put it on the machine, let it run. It surpassed a ton of industry standards by miles, and then broke the guy's machine.
Wow.
So that was kind of satisfying of like, wow, man, we've really come on to something, and the durability and the fatigue resistance is just, there's nothing like it.
Yeah. Well, Moots obviously is known for titanium nowadays. And like you said, it wasn't initially kind of the material of choice, mostly because it wasn't really available. But speaking of these, sort of flexible chainstays, we're starting to see that in carbon as well from some of the latest bikes. Do you think that's something that, I don't know, is interesting at least, or is that something that maybe has some drawbacks that titanium does not?
I think for Moots, the years that we've built in titanium, we really have got to know the material extremely well. I mean, now we're celebrating 40 years, which means we've been building in titanium for 30. And it's interesting to see the new carbon layups and what they're able to do to address flex and forgiveness in certain parts of the frame. For us, it still comes down to titanium is our material, and if it were any other material, we would be somewhat faking it. Like we don't, we know carbon. We've investigated and we've looked at it, but to us it comes down to, here we are building this beautiful titanium frame out, mountain bike frame, road frame, whatever it might be, and we spend all this energy to put into it, and then you take a glue joint or something of that nature that's carbon, and the drawback to us is incorporating that into our bike frame, and like that's not going to be super dependable for our purposes. So we kind of steer clear of it. And I remember early times of carbon fiber seat stay kits that were getting incorporated into aluminum, titanium frames, mainly on the road side. And we looked at that and we decided at that point, this isn't for us. This is taking what we know can be a very durable product and making somewhat of a sacrifice by gluing a joint into it. So we steered away from that. But yeah, it's incredible to see. There's some really cool Softail renditions out there that are in carbon, and very interesting things that those folks are doing with that.
Yeah. Well, I think most riders who've been around for a while and have shopped for mountain bikes kind of understand the advantages of titanium as a frame building material. But could you just outline real quick, like what are kind of the top level, the biggest advantages of titanium over perhaps other materials?
Yeah, it's for us, it comes down, there's a lot of energy used to go into building bike frames, no matter the material. And titanium is no exception. It's very finicky to work with, huge amount of energy. So what we find that is our number one, leader in that area is durability and ride quality. So since we are expending that amount of energy to build out a frame, we feel that using the right material makes that use of energy all that much worth it, basically. It's going to outlast anything else. And so we can find a nugget and a shining star in that of, yeah, it took a lot of energy, but it's going to outlast anything that's out there.
Yeah, and to be clear, the energy that we're talking about, I mean, if you look at like aluminum versus titanium versus steel, the energy in terms of like mining it and extracting it and purifying it and forming it and all of that sort of thing, titanium does, from my understanding, requires more energy kind of to get it to that point of, being a tube that you can use then to build a bike.
Yeah, exactly. And that's that accumulative energy use it's always in our mind. And the beautiful thing about titanium, when you get the frame finished, it doesn't require paint. And so for us, it's an easily painted material, but for us, it's just, it's one of those things that you can abuse it. You can load it on the back of your car, put it in the back of the truck, go wherever, ride, not worry about the paint job. And not using paint and all those chemicals is very concerning for us, for the environment, right? You've got to do something with the chemicals afterwards. So that was another big part of the move to titanium was, of course, the steel bikes needed to be painted. They'll rust and fatigue. And so that was another positive for moving to titanium for us.
Interesting. What about disadvantages? I mean, cost is probably the first one that most people run into. Obviously, a titanium bike is going to cost more than aluminum, right?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely an initial cost barrier to titanium, and we choose to source the best material we can find. And Most of that, by and large, ends up being U.S. manufactured tubing from the aerospace mills, basically. And for us, it kind of comes down to our ethos of, find and use the best material possible. When we get it here at the facility, we apply a cumulative 30 years of knowledge to work with it. And in the end, for us, that's going to produce the best bike possible, best constructed bike. And to us, that just goes a long way of the value in a bike like a Moots, that, the initial investment it's a big pill to swallow, no doubt about it. But it's going to be with the rider for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And what we also really like about titanium is we can adapt the ride quality of the frame for the given rider and the given use. We can stiffen it up, we can lighten it up, mm-hmm. and we can manipulate that ride quality. And that's something about kind of the Moots brand in general, is by the time folks get to a Moots bike, they've been through a number of fairly high-end bikes by that point, usually. And they get on their Moots and they ride and they come back, and more times than not, it's the feeling of, I'm not sure what it is, but I've never ridden a bike that rides like this. And that ride quality to us is absolutely first and foremost. If you came back and said, man, this ride's horrible, that would be a big failure, obviously. And so, we really pay close attention to that as well.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like you really can appreciate that ride quality on a hardtail. And so most of the bikes that Moots produces are hardtails or softtails, but still something where you're gonna be able to appreciate that titanium and that tubing.
Yeah, absolutely. The new Womble and then the Mountaineer that we have in the line right now. The Womble is built to have fun. It's a mountain bike, right? And it's for us, it was not a huge step, but it was definitely a step towards a much more modern geometry without going overboard. Mm-hmm. We definitely got a little more slack in the head angle and a little more steep in the seat angle, and addressing longer travel forks and nice short rear ends, chain stays of the bike. So it really, when you're riding mountain bikes, durability.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I was just thinking about too, is like, I don't know that I've ever seen a study that shows sort of the lifespan of a bike based on material, right? Like how long before somebody, tosses their aluminum bike in the trash or, donates it or whatever. It's not being used anymore versus a titanium. And I'm sure that it's much longer with a titanium bike.
Yeah, definitely. Each one of our bikes comes out of here with a lifetime warranty to the original owner. And many times we'll see that very bike get passed on to a second generation rider in that given family. I've had fathers buy a bike, ride it for 10 years, and then pass it to their son or their daughter. Yeah. And that's really cool. So yeah, it is definitely a great material.
Yeah, and that's an interesting approach too. You're just saying how with the Womble, the geometry is modern and it's updated and it's, more progressive than other bikes in the line have been to this point. But you're also not like chasing kind of the bleeding edge, because we all know that the bleeding edge, people are going to push things and see how far they can go, and then that's probably going to pull back a little bit. It's like you're trying to predict sort of where things are going to land, because this bike is going to be around forever. This isn't like you're going to ride this bike a couple years and then, geometry is going to be different and you're going to want a new one. This is one that you hope is going to stick around. Yeah,
absolutely. And kind of like, just looking at our customers that have bought bikes from us for years, if you swing too far to the really radically slack head angles, it alienates a lot of people. And honestly, it doesn't make for that great of a all-day bike. And, it's like a North Shore, where you're getting like 66 degrees, 65 degree head angles. And that really starts to get away from who we are and who really is riding our bikes. And that's when we started the Womble project over, it's been a year and a half at least. That was the goal. Like, let's take it to where we're comfortable and where we address the modern trends without going to over that line of, this is a very, very kind of one-use bike that, it really likes going downhill, and that's about it.
Not getting your money's worth with that, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
It can only go one direction.
Yeah, so that was carefully thought about and planned out in the design of that bike. And I think we've, when we launched that bike in April of 2020, we were in the midst of COVID and all the early days of COVID time, and we had no idea how it was going to go. And our customers have responded and absolutely just love the bike. So it's really good to see.
Yeah. Well, sticking with the Womble, I wanted to ask you too about, you kind of mentioned ride feel, and that's a big part of the Moots experience. And, titanium in general is a big part of that. And with the Womble, you're using a new double butted construction, I believe. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that kind of influences ride feel and how that all works together?
Yeah. So when the Womble project started, we knew that we were going to build around 140 millimeter fork. And the interesting thing, as you extend the fork length, you start extending the leverage on the front end of the bike. So we knew we had to build it extremely strong to take that kind of punishment. And so the tube set that's in the Womble is specially sourced. It is coming out of Taiwan for us, and it is internally butted, large diameter. So when we're looking at tube-to-tube construction like a Moots, we call that tube-to-tube. As far as stiffness and strength goes, the bigger you can make the footprint from one tube to the next, the better. And that benefit comes out in strength and stiffness. So we really went big. It's the biggest outside diameter tube we've ever used in any of our bikes. And that kind of also speaks to the evolution of tubing supply in some ways, where some of these outfits, as far as the mills, are addressing the push for bigger diameter material. So we really wanted to be on the safe side as far as strength in that bike. So, we went big. And you'll never really read anywhere in Moots marketing materials that we start out by saying, this bike is light. That's about third on the list for us. We, as far as concerns, honestly, first and foremost is durability. The second comes in ride quality. And that lightness and trying to play the gram game is just not something that we really worry about too much. Mm-hmm. It weighs what it is. A fully built size XL in the Womble, tips the scales at about 26 pounds. So not bad for a 140 millimeter fork. And we find that, we're not too concerned about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I imagine farther down that list after number 3, maybe well after, is aesthetics. And I'm just imagining, people know Moots for titanium and for these thin, really sleek looking bikes. Was that a concern at all to go with this larger tubing? Does that change kind of the aesthetic and what people are expecting from a Moots?
Not too much in the front end of the bike. The Womble is our very first bike mountain bike that we use a fastback seat stay kit on. So Moots is really well known for the YBB, which is basically a monostay seat stay kit. The Womble, due to using the shorter chain stays and tucking that rear wheel up under the rider a bit, we decided on fastback seat stays. And that lends itself in a little bit of, people were like, whoa, it's got fastback seat stays, that's cool. And it adds more than just the aesthetics for us. It definitely adds a little bit of different ride quality to the bike. It's a little less harsh in the rear end with the fastback seat stays. And it allows us to build very short seat stays when we get down to the size small in that bike, where if you're using a monostay, you run out of room at the top of the tire to get that monostay between the top of tire and seat tube. So the fastback was definitely something we wanted to do in that bike. And, it came out really nice, we believe.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Well, you mentioned that this is the 40th anniversary of Moots, and so I want to talk about a couple of technologies or products that were kind of debuted along the way from the brand. The first, we talked about YBB Softails, but another is that Moots appears to have embraced bikepacking really early on with the release of something called the Tailgater Seat Bag back in the year 2000. So today, we're all very familiar with bikepacking, but back then, how was bikepacking different from bicycle touring, which had been around a long time? Was what made the Tailgater made for a different crowd?
Yeah, Moots has a long history of building bikes that would take, racks and panniers and that sort of touring, in the steel years and on up through the tie years. And then in 2000, when the Tailgater came to be, it was basically, the folks here at Moots wanted to be able to put a couple more items on their bike. And there really wasn't a system. There were seat bags that strapped to the rails of the saddle and things like that, and hydration packs and things, But the Tailgater really kind of, it maxed out at about 5 pounds carrying capacity. And the hoop was made out of titanium right here in the facility, and the bags were sewn locally. And it was that first kind of peak for us at kind of credit card touring, so to speak, where you might have a pair of sandals, a change of shorts in the bag, and whatever you might have. And that was kind of that peak into independence on a bike with less than panniers and bags. And the Tailgater was wildly popular. Folks were starting to string together sections of trail, and they would get to the next town. They weren't necessarily carrying camping equipment at that time, but just enough to make for a big epic day. And that was quite an innovation by Moots. And then bikepacking bags started appearing, and we've embraced that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was one of those things that let you, like you said, get away from panniers, which aren't exactly single track friendly. And I'm sure people started, going for a little bit longer ride, a little bit longer, and then thinking, hey, we could spend days out here on single track. And that was, seemed like that was sort of one of the things that sparked that idea. Yeah,
definitely. And I think that's, with a small company like Moots, the opportunity to innovate it's kind of in our DNA, where everybody that works here is somewhat of a in-depth cyclist, from super commuter to they've toured around the world, they've seen a lot, and so a lot of those ideas do get baked out into the product for sure.
Yeah. Well, around that time, actually in 1999, Moots had a 29er, and so that was, 22 years ago, 29er. But then by 2010, the brand had a 96er in the lineup, and that was a bike called the Gristle. So what did you think of the bike at that time? You were at Moots then. What was was it, what did people think about it? What was the reason for bringing that into existence?
Well, yeah, at that time, we'd been building 29ers for quite a while, and we had seen some early prototype stuff from Trek, and actually a good friend of ours, Travis Brown. And that kind of spurred us, looking at the combination of 29 front wheel, 26 rear wheel, with the idea that the 29 front wheel rolls over things really nice, and the 26-inch wheel spins up to speed really nice as well. Mm-hmm. And so during that time, we made a hardtail, we made a YBB, and only a handful of those were really ever out there in the public. Mm. And then we made the dual suspension bike, which the very first one was 3-inch travel in the rear, and then it moved to a 4-inch. And I rode and owned the very first prototype that we built out of the dual suspension.
Wow.
And how we came on the name is a whole other story in itself, but incredible riding bike. And it did exactly what it was meant to do: accelerate quickly, roll over things, with the 29 wheel out front. And I sat in Boulder, Colorado in a friend's house and had late night conversations with Travis Brown before cross races down there, talking about the benefits of this and where it could go, and if people could just embrace it. And not soon after that, I was actually racing that bike in Winter Park, Colorado, and flatted the rear tire, mm-hmm. and had mistakenly only taken a 29-inch tube with me on the race,
yeah,
and ended up folding the thing over in the rear tire to get to the finish line. But really cool technology and combination of technology. And since then, I've kind of looked at bikes and thought, man, with 27.5 out there, this could be really cool. I think it's, for the majority of bike riders out there, it's just a little too far of a stretch to be like, what? My bike's got different wheels, and it kind of seems like a motocross setup, because that's kind of where that technology or combination of wheel sizes came from. And it does have a lot of validity to it. The performance is there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, why do you think that it didn't catch on? Now it seems to be another one of the hot things. There's a lot of hot things right now, but mixed wheels seems to be up there in some riders' minds. But it, like you said, it's not mainstream. Does it come down to kind of one of the things that you experienced, having to carry different size tubes and, wheels and worrying about that stuff? Or is it something more fundamental? Is it like, just it doesn't look right to people, or what do you think it is?
I think it's kind of the combination of those things, aesthetically. I think we're in a spot now aesthetically with bikes that the customer kind of expects to see a certain number of things, and mixed wheels isn't in the train of thought, honestly. And when they see that, I think that looks really weird. And I think you have to be somewhat of a, ultra geek on bikes to really understand it and really decide that that's going to be your main, mode of mountain biking. Mm. So I think it's kind of an uphill battle for some of that stuff. I do think, at that time, wheels were, relatively heavier than they are now in both sizes, 29 and 26. Mm-hmm. So I think that was kind of the appeal, that quick spin up to RPM of the rear wheel. And you're basically pushing the 29 along. So that, to me, I think it's just a little too much for people to accept. Even though it might be a better way to go.
Interesting. Well, You mentioned that over the years, Moots has produced different full suspension mountain bike designs, but I don't see one currently in the line. Is that because the brand doesn't see a lot of demand from customers, or are there sort of different challenges associated with building a full suspension bike, and particularly longer travel bikes from titanium?
Yeah, we've had so many over the years, and it's interesting. It is a very tough material to build dual suspension bikes out of, plain and simple. It requires, like we said, a lot of energy, a lot of labor. And by the time we can bring a dual suspension titanium bike frame to market, it's not necessarily outdated, but it's going to cost so much money to justify it. And they have, these days, some of the dual suspension designs, the shelf life on them is very brief, and it's on to the next technology. And Moots, there's some dual suspensions we've had great success with. The last one we did was called the MXZ, and it was 29-inch dual suspension bike. Mm-hmm. But the frame alone is it's, in today's money, it would be $8,000 to do that.
Wow. Is that because it's labor intensive in terms of like all the hardware and the pivot locations and that sort of thing?
Very much so. Yes. You're machining pivot points out of titanium, you're machining swing arms, that kind of thing. It definitely presents, some barriers for us. And it's, after we build a dual suspension bike, our last one, case in point, the MXZ, we look at it and go, man, it's a great riding bike. It really is. However, was it worth it? Did we actually get more people into Moots by doing this? And sometimes we stand around, a couple of years afterwards and look at each other and go, hey, let's promise not to do that again. And just because of the intense, production of that bike internally, it upsets everything else that we have going. And so we'll see what the future holds. I'm not saying we would never do it again, but it would have to be a very strong argument and some awesome technology to do another one.
Yeah. Well, that begs an interesting question in my mind. I mean, if money were no object, would there be like distinct advantages to building a full suspension bike out of titanium versus carbon fiber? Or, we even see in the UK, there's a number of brands that are building steel full suspension bikes. Not a lot, but yeah, if money were no object, would there be a case for a titanium full suspension being sort of superior to some of those other materials?
Yeah, I think so. Again, the durability category comes up where you're smashing down the mountain on a 140 millimeter travel bike. Mm-hmm. And we live in a resort town here with lift access to an amazing bike park. And you see the carnage at the bottom of the hill at the end of the day. And you kind of wonder, like, wow, is there something to this? But again, I think the dual suspension realm it is kind of a bike that you buy to use for, a few seasons, and then you're on to the next. And so that, to us, I think sometimes, we think our energy is better used elsewhere.
Yeah, interesting. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about gravel riding. Does the recent popularity of gravel riding surprise you? It seems like this is something that Moots has been kind of excelling at for a while now and saying this is fun. People should do this. We have great bikes for it. Are you surprised now that this market is finally here and is catching up?
In some ways, I'm blown away how big it's gone. Yeah, in other ways, we kind of are like, well, yeah, we've been telling you this, and and it starts, with folks out riding road bikes and trying to stuff a big tire into it and cover different loops and things like that. And then it kind of goes back to our development of cyclocross bikes. And, that's a very short season and a very specific discipline. So what do you do with that bike the other 9 months of the year? Well, you ride it on dirt roads and eventually a little bit of single track and double track. And so we've really gotten to be known as a great gravel company. We've got some great bikes in the lineup and designs and that sort of thing. But it's so, I guess, heartwarming to see so many different people getting onto a drop bar bike, and this is how they should have been made all along, right? Where it's like higher volume tires, more confidence inspiring, less skittish, tiny little skinny tires of like, man, nobody likes to go out and rub elbows with traffic, so I'm going to go down this dirt road on this bike with this bigger tire. And it's really great to see, because I think we have an opportunity as an industry to bring more people in, and that whether they're brand new to cycling or rode as a kid or a college student or whatever, we have an opportunity to bring those people in, really expose them to something fun that's a lot less dangerous than riding straight up road with cars and things like that. So I think, we feel like we're in a spot to be somewhat of a, catalyst to make that happen. And when people are, getting an entry level bike to the mid level bike, and someday they'll get to the, the high end bike, and that's where we fit in. As that someday dream bike for folks. But no, it's really great to see, and where the technology has gone with, tubeless and nice riding tires with good casings, and then the whole drivetrain componentry end of things is it's a mind-blowing. I started out riding BMX bikes in the early 80s and racing BMX bikes. Had you told me we would have electronic wireless shifting, there's no way I would have believed that. Yeah. What? So no, it is great. And I think we have a lot of credibility in that area. Our terrain around our facility really lends itself to getting out and riding dirt roads and discovering new places and getting people excited to ride again.
Yeah. Yeah. And gravel riding it seems like kind of the ideal use case for not just titanium, but sort of the whole ride feel that Moots is able to deliver. Because you are riding connected to the ground, and it's, it can be bumpy. It can be uncomfortable if you're on, like you said, like a road bike. Where you don't have proper tires, and a lot of those bikes are designed to be very efficient and stiff and that sort of thing. Whereas what Moots is able to deliver is a much more comfortable ride feel.
Yeah, exactly, and that's you can really feel that come out in a gravel bike, which is very close to if you're out on a road bike, you can get even a more direct feel of it. But yeah, with the gravel, just being able to have that sublime kind of, titanium silky ride it is amazing. And, people are out there really pushing the boundaries of gravel. And so that durability really starts to be something to think about, of like, wow, man, I'm kind of in the backcountry on this Forest Service gravel road, miles from anywhere. I definitely want to be able to get back. But yeah, it definitely shines through, I think, a lot in the gravel bikes, how we can tune that.
Well, as a company and a brand that's building bikes domestically, how has Moots been dealing with supply chain disruptions due to COVID? You mentioned that some or a lot of your titanium tubing comes from a U.S. manufacturer. So are you seeing those disruptions that other brands are seeing, or do they just kind of take a different look to them?
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit, with the tubing, not so much. We're planning and forecasting our business, a couple of years in advance on some of our materials. So we are very conscious about what we have in the building. If we run out of tubing, we can't make bikes. So back in the days where these bigger Dreamliners were getting built by the aerospace industry, that was interesting times because the demand on tubing was so high. And honestly, the titanium tubing bike market is such a small percentage of what they make.
What do they use it for? I'm curious about that now in aerospace. Obviously, airplanes are, I would think, mostly aluminum, but what is the titanium used for, if you know?
For a lot of it, they use titanium tubes for hydraulic lines.
Okay.
Because the bursting strength is incredibly high, and you don't want your hydraulics to fail.
Right.
Corrosion resistance. So not only are they using tubing in planes, but they're using cast titanium fittings for some parts of the structure.
Okay.
But when those big Dreamliner contracts were getting fulfilled, we saw some of our lead times go to 2.5 years.
Whoa. And
the prices went up 60%, like crazy kind of stuff. During COVID, it's been interesting. We were well supplied before COVID hit. We try to have about a year's worth of tubing in the building at any given time. And our forecast, our POs that we had placed, the purchase orders, we were lined up and in a good spot. But what's happened to the aerospace industry during COVID and the lack of travel is there's not a big demand on that side of them. So the tubing's been readily available for us. We're feeling pretty good about that situation. The tough part about the supply chain, and all of our peers and friends out there in the industry can relate to this all the way to the bike shops, is components. So derailleurs, shifters, cranksets, from any given brand, that stuff got really tight and continues to be a bit tight. But we have made big strides internally here. We have a single person that is our purchaser, and he's on that basically on a daily and sometimes hourly cadence of being in touch with our component suppliers to make sure as our bikes finish, we've got group sets to go with them. And our dealers have found that to be extremely advantageous to them because they have a hard time getting parts as well. So we warehouse quite a bit of that stuff, and we have honestly a pretty big investment going into that. So we try to secure that. Here at the facility, disruptions during COVID, as we went into lockdown late March, some of us started working from home that could do so, the office folks. But our production has stayed online pretty much throughout this. We have a facility that I wouldn't say it's gigantic, but there's enough space in it where we can maintain 6 to 10 feet between people.
Okay.
So our production staff is, when you enter the building right now, we are masked up throughout the building. We clean all the surfaces each evening. And unfortunately, the real big downside to that kind of stuff is we've had to close our facility to outside tours. Typically, we have a open door policy, and on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you can come to Moots at 10 a.m. and take a factory tour and see how we build our bikes.
Wow.
Obviously, we had to stop that and just limit the folks in the building to the people that are here building bikes and working in the offices. But it's a big concern for sure. It's it's not a good situation out there, and we're doing our best to keep our crew safe.
Yeah. Well, based on all that, is it easier right now to get a Moots frame, say, than to buy a complete bike, or are they still pretty easy to get a complete bike from you guys?
Very easy to get a complete bike. Like I said, we're really forecasting and investing in inventory of parts. So when the frame ships out of here to our dealer, it goes, frame in one box, build kit in the other. So we're doing okay in that way. With the demand of outdoor products in general, and this is bicycle industry to backcountry ski gear, any of that kind of stuff that is allowing people to get out and exercise away from a gym or away from group settings, right? I'm not a gym person, but we've seen incredible demand in those products, and Moots is right there. Our demand for our bike frames right now. People want to get out and be distanced, but also kind of check out and get away from the day-to-day that we're hearing on the news, every hour. So it's, we encourage it for sure. We try to get out for some lunch rides, and obviously in our little bubble, so to speak, and doing our best to keep it safe.
Yeah. Well, speaking of a bubble, I'm curious to know if Moots as a brand and as a company could exist anywhere but Steamboat Springs. Like, how does that location influence sort of the product and the design?
I'm not sure Moots could. And I'm partial. I've lived here for 25 plus years and absolutely love the small town life, and the way that Steamboat is not your typical resort town, I guess, is the way to put it. We do have a resort, and there's a lot of our economy that kind of pivots around that, but within the town of Steamboat, there's a lot of industry here. There's Smartwool is located here, Honey Stinger, Big Agnes, a lot of outdoor companies find their home here. And for us, it's always been that way since Moots was founded in 1981. And it just lends itself, we're literally out the front door here and, 5 minutes on the bike path, and we're on single track. And we get out, we ride a lot, and that really has an impact on the products that we make, the designs that we, use. So I don't know. I think, and our customers out there, right? So you've got like, Colorado, it's so cool, and then there's Steamboat, and it is. There's places all over the place that are really cool and fun to go ride and live. And it has its drawbacks. It's small. We get a lot of snow. If you don't like snow, it's tough. But it's really kind of baked into our DNA. We're out riding, testing, and redesigning bikes kind of on a weekly basis. And so it's a testing ground right out our door. Yeah, I would hate to see. I don't think Moots could be picked up and plopped someplace else. I think it's a large part of our identity.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, because like you said, there is just all the ability to get out and ride and to test products and to really understand how they're being used. And then it seems like attracting the people that work for a brand like Moots, they're going to be attracted to a spot like Steamboat. And again, it all kind of is reflected then back in the product and gives it that kind of vibe that people are looking for.
Yeah, it's, and we get out. We don't, obviously these are different times. There's no travel going on. There's no events. But on a normal year, we definitely get out. We have a Sprinter van and demo bikes, and we go visit dealers and participate in events with, customers of ours that are on their bikes. And we go out and experience these other places to ride. And you always come back here, and for those that haven't traveled outside of the building or Steamboat for a while, you come back with this, man, I was on the East Coast and Maryland, and you should see this crazy rough stuff they ride up there. It is insane. And, you just come back with this appreciation of those other places that's where somebody goes out their door and rides every day. And we bring that back here and we share those stories, and we think about that when we design a new bike or make a tweak to an existing design of like, man, we're not just here in Steamboat. These bikes they're getting ridden all over the world, and we have to keep that in mind. So
yeah,
we do like to get out there and see that.
Yeah, very cool. So what does Moots have in store for the next decade? What are we going to be talking about, you think, when Moots celebrates its 50th anniversary?
I don't know.
You can't predict the future?
I think you're going to see Moots continue on this path of really meaningful innovations and evolution of our product as the world and riders change. I think Moots is not one for radical, 90-degree turns all of a sudden of like, whew, we came out with this. And really, we keep it pretty down to earth. Innovation is always on the top of our minds, and that innovation within the material that we're working with. And so we're not that company that changes for sake of changing. So I think in 10 years from now, I think a lot of the same DNA that Moots started with in 1981 will still be with the company. I think there's, as we pass stories down from one generation of Moots employee to the next, I think that is kind of the legacy of Moots, of, never kind of forgetting, where we started, where we came from, and what it's all about. And it's bikes. It should be fun. And I think, too, Moots' approach to, the business side of things, where we're very aware that, gosh, in order to keep doing this, it's a passion, for many of us. We've got to be smart about our business. And so we can be there at year number 50.
Yeah. It's sort of a unique approach, the industry is full of all kinds of brands, and yeah, Moots definitely has its place among those as being different, not being the same as everyone else. And so that's cool to see.
Yeah, I think it is. It's something about the company, humble beginnings and down-to-earth people, where you could call here on any given day, you get a human on the phone, and let's talk bikes.
Yeah, very cool. Well, Jon, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us. I learned a ton about Moots and titanium, and really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Jeff. Thanks for having us.
Well, you can learn more about the brand at moots.com. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.